Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell in Washington, and here we go again with President Trump renewing his threat to obliterate Iran's civilian infrastructure. New uncertainty over peace talks, tensions skyrocketing over the Strait of Hormuz, energy prices moving higher, and new public backlash against the war. Right now, Vice President Vance, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are likely to travel to Islamabad tomorrow for a second round of negotiations with Iran. That's according to sources familiar with the matter. But Iran's foreign ministry says no decisions have been made about whether its side will attend those talks. Yesterday, President Trump ramping up pressure on Tehran to come to the table, writing on social media, quote, "No more Mr. Nice Guy," and once again threatening to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran if it doesn't agree to a deal by Wednesday. The president also announcing over the weekend that the U.S. Navy seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship it says was attempting to breach the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. The Pentagon releasing this video of the Navy's warning to that Iranian vessel.
Motor vessel Tosca, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
In response, Iran accused the U.S. of violating the ceasefire and vowed to retaliate against what it called an act of armed piracy and theft by the U.S. military. Yesterday on Meet the Press, UN Ambassador Mike Waltz insisted the president will not back down.
If there is no deal by Wednesday, will the president extend the ceasefire agreement?
Well, that's ultimately a decision for the president, and I'm certainly not going to negotiate on national television.
Understood, but is it on the table? Is it on the table? Is that possibility on the table?
Everything's on everything. Absolutely, everything's on the table, and the president's made it very clear he is prepared to escalate, to de-escalate this conflict.
This morning, President Trump echoing that sentiment, telling Bloomberg it's highly unlikely he would extend his 2-week deadline. Although we should note he has previously extended other deadlines to strike Iran's infrastructure, at least 4 times over the last month. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz appears closed once again, and Energy Secretary Chris Wright is preparing the public for lingering pain at the pump due to the war, saying it could be months before gas prices come back down.
When do you think it's realistic for Americans to expect that gas will go back to under $3 a gallon?
I don't know. That could happen later this year. That might not happen until next year. But prices have likely peaked, and they'll start going down.
But President Trump rejects that assessment, saying in an interview with The Hill today that his energy secretary is, quote, totally wrong, and that gas prices will come down as soon as the war ends. And it all comes amid growing public backlash against the president and his handling of the war, according to a new NBC News polling, which we'll dive into in a moment. But joining me now is our team of NBC reporters. We've got all the experts with us. White House correspondent Monica Alba, Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons. He's in Islamabad. NBC News Senior National Security Correspondent Courtney Kube, Business and Data Correspondent Brian Chung, and our NBC News contributor Houman Maj. Monica, let me start with you. We have heard from the White House perspective what it says is the status of talks, that they expect something will be coming shortly. The White House prepared for the possibility that the vice president could be heading up that negotiating team once again. But we're hearing from the Iranians not so fast. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, Kelly, there really have been mixed messages and fast-moving developments here. Some of the information that's been a little bit confusing has come from President Trump himself over the weekend. He couldn't really confirm whether the vice president would be leading that delegation. Ultimately, the White House confirmed that he was going to be joining Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner at some point for these negotiations if they do take place in Pakistan. But then even today, the president indicated that the vice president might already be on his way or would be heading there at some point in the coming hours. But what we expect actually in reality is for the vice president to perhaps depart as early early as tomorrow, though again, this is all still pretty fluid and it still could change. It still could shift, which tells you a lot, Kelly, about the status of these talks and these negotiations that, of course, the vice president was a part of a little over a week ago when he was part of that 21-hour marathon session. But many of the issues that they would need to talk about are still unresolved, and that is part of the challenge as well. So officially, the White House is only saying that this will happen at some point. They're not exactly putting a timeline on it because, again, things still seem to be shifting in real time.
There is a deadline. Will that play into this at all? The ceasefire deadline is Wednesday, and the president says he's not going to extend it. We know the history on that. But what are you hearing? Is that a lever on all of this as well, with that deadline looming?
And interestingly, the president is using the same exact language that he used 2 weeks ago before he decided to ultimately extend that 2-week period to see if negotiations could end up in an end to the war against Iran. He said it was highly unlikely that he would extend that deadline. But there on your screen, you can see the examples of all the times that he did just that in recent weeks, where he did keep moving it, sometimes by just a couple of days, sometimes by a couple of hours. And ultimately, we thought that that deadline was going to be tomorrow, actually, because tomorrow is 2 weeks since he made that announcement. But in reality, now the president is saying it's going to be Wednesday evening, Washington time. To just give you a sense, Kelly, of how little we know about exactly when that is, we've asked the White House to provide the exact window, and they haven't yet. So it's unclear whether it's toward the evening, at the end of the day. Is it dependent, again, on how these talks might go? That is all still unclear as well.
So pencil, not pen, as we're jotting this all down. We're going to look into some of our polling as well, Monica. A third of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of the war. Are you getting the sense that the White House is concerned about those optics and what it could mean for November and the midterm elections?
Well, if you look at the president's social media posts today, that may be a window into a level of concern where the president is saying he has absolutely no concerns about what his critics are saying. But the way in which he is saying that lends you to believe, and it tends to imply, that there might be some concern going on about those kinds of numbers and his low approval rating. In particular, he is pushing back and saying that he doesn't need to operate on any kind of timeline, that he doesn't feel any kind of pressure to make a bad deal. But it's the president of the United States this entire time that has been setting the timeline. He is the one who said this would be a 4 to 6 week military operation, and we are well beyond that now at this point, too. Kelly.
Monica, thank you for those updates. Appreciate your time today. Let's switch over to Keir now, who is in Pakistan. And what is the mood like there in Islamabad? And are you getting a sense that they are preparing for what could be a next round?
Oh, certainly they are, Kelly. By the law of watch what people do rather than listen to what they say, you would have to assume here in Islamabad that these talks are happening. There's security across this capital city, armed security everywhere, frankly. Entire freeways, highways closed off. We were at one earlier today, and the ambassador, the US ambassador and the Iranian ambassador both met with Pakistani officials today, including the police. And what that tells me is those conversations, if you're meeting with the local police, are about the security of your teams who are likely to be arriving anytime soon. I think one thing to keep in mind is that all of the noise that you hear, and in many ways it is noise, or even some of the confrontations that you see in the Strait of Hormuz, are part of the negotiation. They are about, for example, which delegation will arrive first, how to get the other side on the back foot. And even, I think, the question you were asking, Monica, there about the timeline for the end of the ceasefire. Of course, President Trump isn't going to say that he's going to extend the ceasefire, because that would relieve the pressure on the Iranian side. This is a high-stakes diplomatic game, if you like. But certainly here in Islamabad, they believe that these talks are going to take place. And indeed, reports say that the de facto leader of the country, Field Marshal Munir, spoke to President Trump just in the recent days and tried to urge him even to lift the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz to try to get these talks going.
Some important context that you're picking up being on the ground there that makes such a huge difference. We're also hearing some mixed messages from Tehran. How would you sort of dissect that in terms of where they are right now?
Well, I think, Mike Waltz told Kristen Welker over the weekend that the Iranian leadership is divided, and they are. And you can see it more and more clearly. Just as an example, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran, the military, if you like, the most extreme wing, of today spent their time vowing vengeance for the seizing of that Iranian cargo ship around the Strait of Hormuz. On the other hand, the Iranian President Pezeshkian, was talking about diplomacy. Now, people question how influential he is, but there are two sides. There's the more extreme side in Iran, very extreme, some would say, and then there are those that would like to see a deal. And this is what makes this so challenging for the Trump team, is they may be negotiating with Iran, but they may be negotiating with one faction from Iran, who are themselves then going back to Tehran and trying to get others to agree.
That gives us quite the picture, Keir, of how complex this is. Thank you so much for your reporting. I'm going to turn to Courtney now, who is with us in studio. And what more can you tell us about the U.S. seizure of the Iranian-flagged vessel? Where is it now? What happens next?
So the military doesn't want to talk about exactly where it is or where they're going to take it, citing operational security. But we do know that the U.S. military, specifically U.S. Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, are on board. As of a couple hours ago, they were still searching that vessel and checking the cargo on it. But they don't want to talk about exactly where it's going. It's really critical, though, to say, the way that the Navy carried this out, they've been wanting to show us the process that unfolded here, that it took a matter of 6 hours where they were communicating via radio with that Iranian-flagged vessel, telling it that it was about to be in breach of this blockade. Throughout the course of that time, the vessel continued to move towards what the military is calling their blockade line, and they warned them that they were planning to fire. They told them to clear the engine room, and they shot exactly at that, and they shot at it with a deck gun versus a missile or something that could have done very serious damage and potentially even crippled and sunk that ship.
We've been hearing threats from Iran of retaliation after this. What would that look like based on the degrading of some of their capabilities, at least?
Yeah, I mean, Iran's conventional capabilities have been degraded, but they still maintain about half of their missile launchers. A lot of their ballistic missiles that were buried deep underground, the stockpiles, well, they have to pull them out from underground. They remain intact, according to officials we've spoken with. They still have drones. They still have some mines. They still have a capability. And the one that I think would really potentially play a huge role here are the small fast boats by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy that Keir was just explaining to us.
And do we have any sense if there is centralized control of these assets in Iran?
We don't. Keir couldn't have explained it better, talking about how there's really this bifurcation now. There's always been sort of the official Iranian government and then the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who were seen as more extreme. But now it is even more divided than before, as Keir was just explaining, with the messaging that's just coming out today about the blockade. So that's one of the big concerns. Those small fast boats, those are Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. It's not really clear who's telling them what to do or who they could listen to.
And as far as we know, the blockade remains in effect against the Iranian ports, not the entire strait, but against those ports.
Exactly.
Right?
And the U.S. has stopped about 27 ships or convinced them to turn around at this point. So it appears to continue to be in effect right now.
But a tinderbox, too.
Absolutely.
Let me turn now to Brian, who joins us with some of the economic perspective here. Friday's market surged because of optimism over the Strait of Hormuz being reopened at that time. Iran now saying that critical waterway is again closed. So give us the picture of markets and how they're reacting today.
Yeah, it was a very different picture going into the weekend when it seemed like the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz had us essentially at the end of the tunnel here. But then the developments over the weekend, which you've explored with all the correspondents before me, has certainly pointed to the opposite direction. That's why it looked like it was going to be a nasty day on Wall Street. And yes, indeed, all the major markets did end a negative for the day, but only marginally so. I wouldn't describe any of these moves where it's a 0.25% down for the day as particularly notable. It seems like markets are drifting sideways while they try to figure out whether or not the dialogue between the U.S. and Iran is going to happen at all. There were some even questions over whether or not the vice president was on his way to Pakistan to have those negotiations. And for that reason, while the markets and investors say we don't even know if those conversations are happening, essentially deciding to hold steady on where they were in their investment portfolios. That might explain some of the lack of market action today. But nonetheless, we're still looking at crude oil futures, which are at $86 on WTI. That is the United States indexed oil prices that we've seen. $89 by other measures. That is still up 33% since the start of this war. And of course, Americans still feeling those over $4 a gallon averages at the pump nationwide.
Well, speaking of that, the president, as you may have heard, he said that his energy secretary is totally wrong when Chris Wright suggested gas prices may not come back under the $3 mark a gallon until next year. I don't want to put you between the president and his cabinet secretary, but what's your assessment of what the expectations are for gas prices?
Yeah, and the president perhaps trying to walk back the commentary from the energy secretary, as you mentioned, Chris Wright, who said over the weekend that it's possible that we might not see the average price nationwide on gallon fall below $3 until next year. He did couch that and say, yeah, it could happen later on this year as well. But the president does have a messaging problem here where his war has led to higher prices at the pump for Americans that already feel squeezed by inflation. And so having members of your administration go out there and say these costs are going to be around for a while is an issue. Analysts have been telling us after the Strait of Hormuz was open last week that it could be the case that we see gas prices fall to $3.35-ish by Labor Day of this year. Again, that was under the optimistic scenario that the Strait of Hormuz was indeed going to be reopened. It's hard to see that scenario playing out with the developments over the last few days. But Kelly, again, it does seem like there's a bit of pessimism, if you will, over gas prices falling to where they were pre-war anytime soon.
You made mention of inflation, and our latest NBC News polling shows that the most important economic issue facing Americans right now is, in fact, inflation, the rising cost of everything you need to spend for your daily living. Are you seeing signs that the war is actually driving up inflation?
Yeah, well, I think that so far the data that we've seen says that the overall level of inflation is indeed higher as a result of those higher energy costs. So the reading that we got on inflation in the form of the consumer price index was the highest that we've seen in years. Again, people would argue that once gas prices go back down, presumably once this conflict is over, inflation should come back down to the relatively mild readings that we were getting prior to that. But when you consider that Americans have been feeling the pinch of not just this war in the form of higher gas prices, but they've already been saying affordability was an issue prior to this war having begun. 45% of Americans saying in that poll that inflation is the top issue. And I think that's notable when you consider it was still around 45% in the previous polls where we asked the same question since President Trump began his second term. So that shows that really hasn't improved despite the president's insistence in public remarks that inflation has gotten better. He's even argued that prices have gone down, which is just simply not the case in terms of the aggregate data that we've been watching. But nonetheless, that is something that is a messaging issue for the administration, Kelly.
Those are helpful checks on the data. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate it. And turning now to our special contributor, Houman Majd. And let's start with these stalled negotiations. You bring a lot of life experience and expertise on what's happening in Iran. Do you get the sense that the Trump administration's attempt to pressure Tehran to get back to the table, could that be effective? And do you think there would be talks prior to this ceasefire expiration this week?
Well, it's hard to say whether the talks will happen before the expiration of the ceasefire. But in terms of the pressure on the Iranians, that's never worked. And it won't work this time either. I mean, in fact, I would argue that the reason the Iranians are hesitant to even commit to talks is because of all that pressure that President Trump is putting on the Iranians. Again, talking about blowing up bridges, infrastructure, that sort of stuff, which doesn't sit well with the Iranians at all. And especially with the IRGC, as Keir was saying earlier, those people are not people who are happy to make a deal with the U.S. under those kinds of circumstances. They've always insisted on being treated as equals, being treated with respect. And I would argue that the diplomats feel the same way. So no, I don't think that pressure is necessarily going to help at all. And in fact, the idea that the blockade is still in effect for the Iranians is actually a huge slap in the face. They argue that they open the Strait of Hormuz, as it were, or we're going to open the Strait of Hormuz once the Lebanon ceasefire was in effect, which it was. And then President Trump said, well, yeah, that's fine, but we're not going to let any Iranian ship dock in Iranian ports or leave Iranian ports and go and export material. So the Iranians said, well, the strait's going to be either open for all or for none. And so they reclosed it almost right away on the same day. So, I mean, that kind of pressure is not really working at all, and it never has, if you really think about it. The only time Iran was able to make any sort of headway with the any U.S. administration was with the Obama administration and the JCPOA, when that took a lot of trust building when it started. The talks for the nuclear program started in September of 2013 and ended in July of 2015, as you remember yourself, with John Kerry and Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran. So that's a 2-year program, basically, to get to a trustworthy place where they could say we have a deal. But
give us a sense, if you could. Let me just jump in and ask this, if I may. Do you sense that inside Iran there is any pressure building to try to end this war, given all of the implications, all of the hardship that is brought with the damage that's been done? What, if any, pressure is happening internally to try to find a solution?
Oh, sure. The diplomats want a solution. I think I would argue the IRGC does too. The IRGC are not stupid people. They know that they have to fix the economy, basically, since they are the most powerful organization right now inside Iran. And the person they report to, the new supreme leader, we're not sure of his power. We haven't heard from him directly. We haven't seen him. The IRGC reports to him directly, but we don't know what that means in reality. But they're pragmatic people as well. They know that if the economy isn't fixed, if they can't get sanctions relief, that the uprising that we saw in January with the Iranian people, which started with economic issues, will just happen again. So they're also keen to get things, sorted out. And the only way they will get sorted out economically is for sanctions to get sanction relief from the United States.
And that's certainly a big pressure point.
That's a big pressure point. Absolutely, yeah.
We so appreciate your expertise today. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll talk to you again soon. I know this continues to be a vital topic. And coming up, yes, that's for sure. Absolutely. Coming up, the young and the restless. A deep dive into NBC News Decision Desk polling, including the view from some of America's youngest voters on the economy, the Trump agenda, and we'll be live in battleground Michigan next. Plus the Maine line. NBC speaks to 2 Democratic Senate candidates vying to take on the longtime Republican Senator Susan Collins in May in a race that could decide the future of Democratic Party and the balance of power in the Senate. Those are key aspects of this race. We'll have more coming up. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. Now, as we noted at the top of the show, NBC News poll numbers show the war with Iran and the economy are taking an increasingly political toll on President Trump, with his approval rating now sinking to a new low. NBC News chief data analyst Steve Kornacki joins us now with all of the details.
Kelly, let's dive right in with the reminder. It's the Decision Desk poll. This is of all adults, not just registered voters. A little bit of a wider net, but Donald Trump's approval rating here, you could see, now down to 37% in this poll, 2 points lower than it was the last time we checked in. What's different from then to now? Of course, it's the start of the Iran war, which remains ongoing. Looks like it's hurting Trump politically, and you can really see that it is in this next question here, just the approval rating specifically on Iran, and that number is just 33%. By the way, a quarter of those who say they are Republicans are in the disapprove camp here when it comes to how the president is handling Iran. Another trouble area for the president right here. This has been the story of his second term. Inflation and the cost of living, only 32% there. The bright spot, if you want to call it that, for Trump here is this: border and immigration. This number of 44%, obviously, it's higher than these other areas. It's also higher than it was when we asked about border and immigration earlier this year, when ICE, when Minnesota, when those events were in the news. So the president has recovered a bit of his standing there. But again, still it's a majority disapprove when it comes to border and immigration. Looking more specifically here at Iran, what folks want to happen from here, clear majority here say they don't want anything else to happen. They want no further military action. A third of those who say they're Republicans fall into that camp. That's overseas. Domestically, we say cost of living front and center on people's minds. We ask them, what's your top economic concern to you and to your family? Inflation, cost of health care, those two combined, clear majority right there. Then there's this, gas. Gasoline taking center stage a bit. The cost of it, 29% say it's very serious. 36% say it's somewhat serious. Combined, that's 65%. Almost 2/3 saying that gasoline, the cost of gas, is a serious problem for their families right now. One other interesting finding here, I think it gets to the question of foreign policy. It gets to sort of the direction of the two parties and a big shift that's going on. We ask folks, who do you sympathize more with when it comes to the Israelis and the Palestinians? Look, overall, dead even, 50-50 here. But look at some of these divides. One of them is partisan. Among Republicans, overwhelmingly, 81% side with the Israelis. Among Democrats, complete opposite. 75% say they sympathize with the Palestinians. So a clear partisan divide there. That Democratic number is the one that's moving big time toward the Palestinians. The other big movement we see is generational. That rising generation, Gen Z, look at this. This kind of goes much more across the partisan spectrum. 3/4 basically of Gen Z say that they sympathize more with the Palestinians, Kelly.
And a big thank you to Steve for breaking all of that down for us. And we see President Trump's falling approval rating is being fueled in part by a growing number of younger Americans who are souring on the president and say the country is headed in the wrong direction. According to our poll, 76% of Gen Z Americans disapprove of the job President Trump is doing. And that's a 12-point shift since August, with 80% disapproving of his handling of inflation and the cost of living. And the top issue for Gen Z Americans, an 81% disapproval rating of his handling of the war with Iran. And that brings us now to our colleague, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who has been speaking to students at Lake Michigan College in Benton Harbor, Michigan. I know this is a place you like to be, right out there talking to people, and you've been hearing about these issues. It's your happy place, Shaq. I know that. So tell us, what did you get a sense about this direction of the country that the students you're meeting with, what are they saying?
Kelly, you know me well. It is my happy place because we see those polling numbers, and I always want to know, how does it compare when you're talking to people? What more can you learn? And the conversations that I've been having here really reflect the frustrations that you see reflected in that poll. You have vast majority of people saying that they believe the country is moving in the wrong direction. Many of them pointing to the economy, saying they're intimately familiar with the price of gas, the price of groceries. And these are folks who, many of them, have a foot in the job market that they consider to be a tough job market. Listen to some of the conversations that I had when I asked them about the track of the country and the direction of the country.
I think the economy is not doing super well. I don't think that international relations are very well. Don't think that we are kind enough to one another. Seems like we're headed towards a hostile environment in our country.
I mean, it seems like the cost of living has gone up a little bit, just in terms of like the cost of food, maybe things getting taxed a little bit in terms of if they're getting imported from other countries.
I would say like ICE and deportation and all that kind of stuff that's going on. Prices of everything, just everything.
What are you noticing with prices?
Gas, groceries, rent, utilities, everything.
What direction are they?
Up.
Now, one word of caution is I did talk to some people who actually responded to the poll, and even though they said they feel the country is moving in the wrong direction, they said they didn't believe that was a reflection of policy. They pointed to other things like religion or other factors that made them respond that way.
I did hear a mention of foreign policy among the people you talked to. Did you get a sense that the war in Iran is of specific concern to many of them?
Absolutely. And you mentioned about how 81% of young voters say that they disapprove of how President Trump is handling that war. About 65% saying that they strongly disapproved, which suggests that this is an issue that is animating for folks and has the ability to shift how they perceive President Trump and Republicans. Listen to some of those conversations.
When the war started in Iran, it kind of, I didn't expect that to happen. Because obviously his campaign was no wars, and of course he started a war. So that kind of really deterred my change on opinions.
It made you view him more negatively?
Yes.
I feel that we have kept allowing ourselves to get dragged into these proxy wars, and it does none of us home any good. And these people who live in these countries are suffering at our hands for what? There's no gain here. They didn't attack us.
Kelly, you know better than anyone there are midterm election implications to what you heard there. If young voters pull back or if they're animated, if they say they're angered by what they're seeing and this drives them to the polls, that can influence what ultimately happens, especially in these swing states like Michigan.
That's why it's so great to have you there getting the pulse of what young voters are thinking. So thank you for being on the ground for us, Shaq. We appreciate it.
You got it.
And up next, the progressive newcomer versus the establishment governor inside Maine's Democratic Senate primary. That's showcasing the party's divisions over age, ideology, and generational change. NBC speaks to both candidates and the voters straight ahead. This is Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are following breaking news and new details out of a horrific story from Louisiana, where authorities have now identified 8 children killed in a mass shooting yesterday.
Today we remember Jayla Elkins, age 3, Shayla Elkins, age 5, Kayla Pugh, age 6, Layla Pugh, age 7, Makeda Pugh, age 10, Soraya Snow, age 11, Conundrum Snow, age 6, Braylon Snow, age 5.
Police say all 8 children were shot at this home in Shreveport. They've identified the gunman as Shamar Elkins, the father of 7 of those children. Police say Elkins shot a woman described as his girlfriend at a different house before killing the 8 children and shooting his wife. Both women were critically injured but are still alive. Investigators say Elkins then fled in a stolen vehicle, leading police on a chase. This is home security video of the moment officers caught up with him. Police say there was an exchange of gunfire, but that the suspect's exact cause of death has not yet been determined. The ATF is investigating how Shamar Elkins, a convicted felon, was able to obtain access to a gun. Officials today say that this is among the most heartbreaking tragedies they've ever encountered.
8 innocent children losing their lives as a result of domestic violence. There are no words that can fully capture the depth of this loss. No words that can ease the pain of the families who are grieving. No words that can explain the weight of 8 young lives taken far too soon.
And we are back. Now, in all likelihood, any chance the Democratic Party has to win control of the Senate in November goes right through the state of Maine and requires unseating Republican Senator Susan Collins. But first, Democrats have to pick a candidate in a primary that is putting the party's thorniest debates about ideological issues and generational change on full display. Maine's Democratic governor, Janet Mills, is 78 years old, or 78 years young, depending on your point of view, and is seen as the establishment figure as she faces off against 41-year-old progressive political newcomer Graham Plattner. Now, polls show Plattner is leading by a significant double-digit margin, less than 2 months from primary day. But Mills told my colleague Sahil Kapur she doesn't put much stock in those polls and dismissed concerns over her age.
I do what I always do, and that is going out and talking to people, one-on-one, small groups, and getting to know what's on people's minds.
Got it.
Small businesses, because people already know who I am, pretty much. They've already voted for me at least once, or had that choice anyway. And, you know, I've done things. I've gotten stuff done for people in Maine.
One other voter in Maine, Jennifer, she's 61. She's a moderate from Holden. She told us she was leaning toward Mills. She doesn't love Plattner, doesn't trust him completely, but she says we've got to change, and he's younger and he's new. She worries 78 is too old. What do you say to her?
I say this. Plattner is the same age as J.D. Vance. He's 41. Does she like J.D. Vance? Just because of age? No, it's not all about age. Age isn't the issue. I have experience. I have know-how. I can go there on day one and get things done.
Meanwhile, Plattner, who campaigned alongside Senator Elizabeth Warren on Saturday, offered his take on why he's leading in these polls and why he believes he could be the best choice to take on Senator Susan Collins, despite controversies over his past statements on sexual assault and a tattoo he covered up, which resembled a symbol associated with Nazis.
I think there's just a exhaustion with this kind of politics now in the electorate. I think that's why the negative ads that the governor's campaign came out against us backfired spectacularly. Our support has gone up. And so I think people are sick and tired of this negative performative politics, a politics that is not remotely built around discussing policy. We are playing an entirely separate game. We are doing a campaign that is entirely different, being far more organizing focused, really focusing on going out into communities and connecting with Mainers directly.
Sahil also spoke to both candidates about a recent NBC News focus group that asked Democratic voters in Maine and also in Michigan their feelings on the party.
I want to mention to you some words that some focus groups of Democrats we talked to in Michigan and Maine used about the Democratic Party. Weak, spineless, floundering, ineffective, distracted. Does that sound about right to you?
I think I might use all of those words to describe the Democratic Party on a daily basis. So, yeah, that sounds right to me.
Do they have a point?
Distracted, wow. They probably do. I mean, I'm not happy with everything going on in Washington, not at all. But we need to level the playing field. I think the Democrats have to take back the Senate. And that's one good reason I'm running, because I think the control of the United States Senate does go through Maine, and I want to make sure we capture it.
And joining me now, fresh off this reporting trip to Maine, is NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur. Great work, great to get both candidates and also you talk to voters to get a sense of what they are thinking. When they talk about the qualities they're looking for, what stands out?
Yeah, Kelly, one of the first things you learn going to Maine is what an institution Susan Collins is. She's coming up on 30 years in the Senate. It was very common for me to walk into rooms full of Democratic voters and meet at least somebody who had supported her in the past. So that's what Democrats are up against. The second thing I noticed, among Democrats at least, is this jarring disconnect between party leadership here in Washington and the sentiments on the ground. Party leadership here, including Senator Chuck Schumer, are supporting Mills. They see her as safe, tested, most likely to beat Susan Collins. On the ground, the feeling is very different. They're ready for something different. They've lost their trust in party leadership, and they want younger, more populist candidates. Take a listen to voters I spoke to.
I have issues with Graham Plattner's past, and I don't know if zebras can change their stripes, but I'm curious, and basically I'm for anyone who can defeat Susan Collins.
Janet Mills is the one who has the grit, the experience, the intellect to go up against Susan Collins and finally get her out of the Senate.
I think she's done a great job as governor, but I'm excited to have someone else with new ideas and who's really willing to fight for Maine people.
I think she's a good person. I think she's a good politician, but she's 77. I think it's time for some new blood.
Do you feel pretty confident that Graham Plattner can win a general election?
Yes, I do.
I'm very struck by spending time in Maine where they're not attacking these folks. They're deciding different qualities, but they're not saying, I really don't like this one, I really don't like that one. They're looking for something else. That stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that Graham Plattner is going to have to do if he's going to become a senator is win over a lot of voters who've supported Janet Mills at one point and who have supported Susan Collins at another point. And part of the thing you just heard there from voters is they not only, some of them like Graham Plattner, but some of them don't like him but are willing to support him because they think he's more electable than Janet Mills. Again, a yawning gap between them and what party leadership here thinks.
Defining what's electable can really be troublesome for people. Now, he is also an Iraq War veteran. He brings that to the conversation. I want to play part of your conversation where you talked about how important that is, and then we can talk about it a little further.
The thing that it has done for me emotionally is that it's just really sad and frustrating to watch a system and people in power essentially just do the same thing that took me to war in Iraq, but without any of the attempts to trick anybody. Like, they just understand that they can do it. Pete Hegseth wants to drop bombs on people. And so they just go drop bombs on people. They're not even trying to justify it.
I mean, you've talked about reimagining power and thinking and rethinking the way Democrats exercise it in Washington. Is there anything you think they could be doing now that they're not, given that they're not in the majority and able to corral enough votes to stop this war in particular?
Yeah, organize an anti-war movement. To get people out into the streets and effectively oppose a war, that requires organization, requires resources, and it requires people to go on TV and talk about doing it. I don't see any of that happening. I mean, this kind of goes to one of my core critiques of the Democratic Party. It has forgotten that power derives from more than just the institutions. It derives from more than just the structures that they're used to working in. Power can be secondary, outside of the institutions, coming from things like movements, coming from things like organizing people. The Democratic Party has done, from what I can tell, absolutely nothing on that front.
So what do you look for next? Your last takeaways here.
Yeah, so voters are very angry about the war in Maine. They're not just opposed to it. There's a raw anger there. They don't understand why we're there. They've noticed that prices are going up. They want the money to be spent at home. And, you know, so much of politics is timing. Graham Plattner is using this moment. He's gotten a little bit from his personal experience. He can speak about this in a way that nobody else can, and he's taking full advantage of that to talk about his own experience. And also, Janet Mills, the governor, has sharpened her attacks on the Iran war, making a constitutional case against it, a moral case against it, and an economic case against it. Finally, Kelly, Susan Collins has so far voted in favor of continuing this war, allowing Trump to prosecute it. But she said in a statement to NBC News she may turn against it after the 60-day mark. Clearly, she, too, is in touch with the sentiments on the ground.
Great window into an important race. Thank you, Sahil. We really appreciate it. And after the break, it's the economy and the war and the president. Our panel weighs in on NBC's latest Decision Desk polling as the race for the midterms heats up. You're watching Meet the Press Now. It's panel time. Welcome back. With midterm primaries ramping up, polling shows Americans overwhelmingly think the country is on the wrong track, according to our latest NBC News Decision Desk poll. And as we noted, that trend is even more pronounced among younger Gen Z Americans who were key to President Trump's and the Republicans' victory in 2024. And whose dissatisfaction could shake things up in 2026. So joining me now for today's panel, Jeff Mason, Washington correspondent for Bloomberg News. Ashley Etienne, former communications director for former Vice President Kamala Harris, and a number of other jobs along the way. I've known her for a long time. And Michael Dubke, White House communications director during the first Trump administration. Great to have all of you here. Jeff, I want to start with you because you had one of those call me lately, you know, call me, phone a friend, right. Meaning among the number of reporters who spoke to the president by phone. You have a long relationship covering the president, talking with him many times. But give us a sense of what he said today that really moved the news.
Well, interestingly to me, what he said was, number one, that he is not likely to extend the ceasefire, which is sort of different signal than he was sending last week in terms of him wanting to get a deal quickly. And apropos that, he also said he's not in a rush to get a deal, which is, again, he said specifically, I'm not in a rush to get a deal because I don't want to get a bad deal. And he wants to, and he kind of put some shade on what he called treasonous members of Congress for putting pressure on them for a deal. So that's, of course, a word that he uses as a
more often than most people do.
Indeed.
Yes.
But those were some of the main takeaways.
And Mike, when we're looking at the polling, if you are advising Republicans on what they should be doing to sort of fight against this negative mood that we're seeing reflected in the numbers, what is your key message?
Well, amongst Republicans? Sure. Because what I took out of your poll is the one thing that I've been talking about for a long time now, that the president isn't going to really be moved by a lot of these polls that show the shrinking support until that base Republican vote goes down. And that was the one thing that I noticed in the poll. It went down a couple of points on just the economic issues, and I think it was 4 points on Iran. But as long as that base stands there with him,
The always durable base you're talking about.
Almost always durable base.
But what about all the young voters that went his way? Do you think if they are backing off that hurts Republicans?
Do we get back to the place where are the young voters going to turn out in the next election? I think it does. Look, I think psychologically it can hurt. And I think psychologically, I think the president does pay attention to that because he was very proud of that vote that he got in 2024.
Well, this is encouraging news that the president is only focused on the base, because the reality is when you go into the midterms, it's not your base that actually wins those elections.
That was very smooth how you picked up on that, Mike.
No,
he sets me up every time. But here's the reality. It's going to be,
smooth.
You only win those races on the margins, and it's going to be those independent voters that are going to make the difference. And we're seeing now high turnout among Democrats, high turnout among independent voters, and they're the most concerned with the economy and with the war in Iran.
But there's a lot of frustration with Democrats, too. Do you think Democrats need to do something differently to try to talk about what they are for and what they could bring at a time when there's a lot of criticism?
Kelly, you're reading my notes. Absolutely. The problem with the Democratic Party now is they're not putting a counter proactive affirmative agenda out. Their vision for the nation that actually contrasts with the president's vision. When I was running the opposition for Pelosi in Trump's first term, about this time we rolled out our big alternative agenda. We went from 6 points ahead of Republicans to 14 points ahead of Republicans going into the fall. That's going to make up the gap for the Democratic Party. I'm not sure why they're dragging their feet on it at this point, but it's incredibly necessary.
My guess is they can't come to an agreement on what those issues are, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah.
I just think that's probably
they've agreed
part
on
of the
corruption,
reason.
though, which is the obvious.
Momentum is huge in elections. It's gigantic. And I think that's what you're seeing right now with the Democrats winning all of these down ballot races. If you look at the actual numbers, they're getting the Harris vote is turning out in these elections, but the Trump vote isn't. So Republicans have to worry about the fact, A, Donald Trump's not on the ballot. So for whatever good or evil that is, he's not on the ballot. And then secondly, they've really got to worry about how they get those folks that voted in 24 out again in 26. And there's a lot of messaging that has and work to do on that.
Well, let's talk about the Trump factor. And let me tap into your conversation again with the president. Obviously, how people feel about the Iran war may play out a lot in the midterms. And from what you gathered from him, in knowing him as you do, in terms of tone of voice, his mood and so forth, do you think that he is feeling these numbers that we're seeing reflected in the polling where many Americans are against this war effort?
I mean, I think the White House is certainly feeling those numbers and is not happy about it. I went to CPAC a couple weeks ago and talked to a bunch of voters there, again, base voters, and they were, for the most part, still very supportive. So I don't think they're worried about the base, but they have reason to worry about independence. But to bring it back to the topic of Iran, the polling shows, and NBC polling shows as well, that the war is not popular. And the president is aware of that. And I think that's why we sort of began to see him last week saying, I'm ready for this war to be over. He didn't say that specifically, but he was indicating, I'm ready to wrap this up.
You sense an impatience to get it done?
At the end of the week, I did. And this week, in the conversation that I had with him, that seemed to have shifted again a little bit away from being in a rush, because he used that word, and wanting to get a good deal, because this is also about legacy for President Trump. He likes to think of himself as a deal maker, and he wants to get a good deal with Iran.
Do you think it might also be to try to keep Iran off balance?
100%. I mean, this is somebody who is a former businessman, negotiator. He knows exactly what he's doing when he's sending mixed signals, whether that's to reporters like me or whether it's in direct talks with the opposition.
Or on Truth Social.
A lot of ping-ponging on Truth Social.
Yes.
This notion of rushed or not rushed, do you get a sense that the president has a certain urgency timeline? We know he wants to go to China for a big trip that's coming up in May. We know that there is concern about getting this over for gas prices to eventually come down.
I mean, his supporters up on Capitol Hill certainly want this to get over so they can start talking about other issues. I think Jeff is absolutely correct when you're trying to weigh this with the president, because he's torn here. Yes, he wants to move beyond Iran because he's got the trip to China coming up, because he's got all of his supporters on Capitol Hill. But he's also the art of the deal. I mean, if Donald Trump is known for anything, it's getting a good deal. So he can't let that, he can't take a bad deal here at all. But I do think he's probably in
a deal that's maybe going to look like the one that Obama had.
Well, that involved pallets of billions of dollars being transferred
there
by
was some
plane.
talk about some money for Iran. Okay.
That was a bad deal too.
Do you think that the Iran messaging within the Democratic Party is effective right now?
No, I think I think it has been. But, Trump does more damage to himself than the Democratic Party ever could. But what I do think the Democrats need to do is expand the narrative that they're talking about now. They did the war crimes resolution. I think they did the war powers resolution. I think they need to do a war crimes resolution. Focus on the fact that the president went in and killed, over 1,500 civilians, including children. Amp up the pressure.
Even when those don't succeed, to just use them for
the because what you're trying to do, what you're trying to do is create pressure on the ground. So what you want to do is take it out of Washington, D.C. in a process argument. The war powers is a process argument. Argue on something that all Americans can agree on. Create that pressure from the ground up in those 40 districts.
And we're going to leave them all wanting more, because this conversation is going to continue. But we have to say goodbye. So Jeff, Ashley, Michael, thank you all. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And as you know, news is still coming up right here on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.